Hello and welcome everyone to the Defining a Solid Project Execution Plan for North American Refining Portfolios webinar, hosted and organised by Petrochemical Update here in London. My name is Theo Jones, conference producer at Petrochemical Update, and I'll be briefly opening up and introducing the webinar for you this morning. There are over 300 of you in the audience, which is absolutely brilliant. We're pleased to be with you this morning, and we really hope you enjoy the webinar today. Before we do kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping from me. The webinar will last approximately 60 minutes. It is being recorded, and you will have the full audio recordings to listen back to at your leisure. Look out for an email from my colleague, Carla Sharp, and she'll send a link to you with the podcast next week. If I could ask you, as we go along, to just ask the questions that you want to submit as and when they pop up. The format we have this morning is we'll be answering questions and posing them to our panelists as we go. You can submit questions, via the questions box on your screen. Most of our speakers today are also serving as panelists at Petrochemical Update's upcoming Refining, Engineering and Construction Conference, which is taking place in November 14th and 15th in Houston at the Omni Houston Hotel. The conference is 1/3 of a 3-in-1 conference that we're hosting in Houston. The other two, downstream modular construction and downstream commissioning and startup. And across all three co-located conferences, we're expecting in excess of 600 attendees from owner and contractor organizations from around the US, Canada, and South America. If the topic of today's webinar is of interest to you, and if you'd like to meet some of our speakers in person, I would highly recommend that you check it out. So without further ado, I've spoken enough. I will introduce and hand over to our our webinar chairperson, Eric Hans-Koch. Eric Hans is a junior partner with McKinsey & Company in the Houston office. He primarily serves clients in the oil and gas, utility, and chemical industry. He is focused on operations and capital productivity work and specializes in optimizing small capital projects and portfolios. Eric Hans is also, incidentally speaking, at the conference in November, where he will talk about small CapEx projects and portfolios. So that's all from me. Once again, thank you very much for being with us this morning, and with that, I will hand over to Eric Hans. Eric Hans, over to you.
Thanks, Theo. Welcome to today's webinar, everybody. My name is Eric Hans-Koch. I'll be your moderator today. Thank you all for joining, and of course looking forward to an interesting and valuable conversation today. So before we have our three expert speakers introduce themselves, just wanted to reiterate one thing. So we're going to have three main topics of conversation today. And so while you submit your questions, the way that we'll run the session this morning is that when we're on topic one, we basically have our three speakers cover the topic. We will then basically talk through the questions that you have on the first topic before moving to topic two. And so really want to bundle the conversation and the questions together. So we have three sections basically. And of course welcome questions from the audience as much as possible. So over to the introductions of our three speakers today. I think we have three people with some very unique perspectives on today's topic, which I think is fantastic. So I would like to ask each of them to just briefly share their professional background as well as their experience with the topics today. Michael, why don't you start?
Hello, this is Michael Van Swol. I'm Vice President for Project Delivery with Jacobs. Currently out of the Houston office. I've been in the business for 30 years. Been engaged in many large mega projects around the globe, in the Middle East, in Asia, Russia, as well as domestically here in North America. I spent during my career, I've also spent a lot of time in the field. Early on in my career as a project engineer, construction manager, site manager, and took that perspective and learnings from being in the field to our home office environment, where I then picked up with project management, project director, and then moved up to vice president of project management in the business, both in the oil and gas field, in downstream refining, and now, as we see now, also in our market here in the U.S., a lot of petrochemical and chemical work. So I'm very excited to be on the call today, and I look forward to a very healthy discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Patricia, why don't you go next?
Sure. My name is Patricia Griffith, and I am a mechanical engineer, and I have also an MBA as my academic background. And then my professional background includes about 10 years in project management, serving on different roles within the project management, going from, like most of us, from project engineer up to construction manager. And after those 10 years, I actually joined IPA, Independent Project Analysis. Many of you may be familiar with the company, but for those of you who are not, they are basically a research tank that focuses on best practices for developing and executing projects. I did work for IPA for about 15 years, and I was the managing director for the operations in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And then I joined McKinsey about 5 years ago, and with McKinsey I serve clients globally, mostly in the refining, chemicals, upstream, mining industries, and globally. So I would be very happy to share with you today some of my knowledge in terms of what I have observed, both working hands-on as well as a consultant of more than 300 plus projects that I have consulted with.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Kane, over to you.
Yeah, my name is Kane Hiddle. I am the Vice President and Project Manager for HollyFrontier at the El Dorado, Kansas refinery. I have 15 years of professional experience, all here at the refinery in El Dorado. I've done, my entire career has been in various project roles, from project engineer, project manager, been involved in project definition, front-end work, clear through construction, various size projects, from very small plant size projects to much larger expansion projects and grassroots projects. Currently oversee both the large and small capital project portfolios for the El Dorado refinery.
Awesome, fantastic. Thanks to you all for your introductions. As mentioned, the topic for today is defining a solid project execution plan for refineries here in North America. And I think in today's oil price environment and the continued pressure on cutting capital budgets, I think delivering projects on time, on budget, and on quality is, of course, very important to compete in the current refining industry. Right? And I believe this is actually true for whatever type of project, right? Whether it's like a maintenance, a safety, environmental, a growth project. And so today we'll basically discuss three main pillars of project delivery. First, we'll touch on front-end loading and scope definition. Secondly, we'll talk about project leadership and the required skills and capabilities. And third and last, we'll talk about EPC and contractor selection and management. This is a quick reminder, feel free to send us questions when we basically dive into the first topic. So let's start with front-end loading and scope definition. And Kane, as you oversee all the projects, of course, at the HollyFrontier El Dorado refinery, it might be interesting to hear from you first. How do you approach front-end loading and scope definition?
I don't think there's anything new here, but front-end loading and scope definition is critically important to project success. Obviously, if you don't have the scope defined, then you're setting yourself up for numerous problems down the road. I would say that every project is different and may require some different considerations on front-end loading and scope definition. Of a grassroots unit that's mostly independent of other areas may not require quite as tight of a front-end loading, where a revamp that's in an existing unit may require more study and definition. So I think it is highly dependent on the project itself, but the importance cannot be understated of front-end loading.
Awesome, thank you, Kane. So maybe over to Patricia. Patricia, right? In obviously serving many clients globally in both your work at IPA and at McKinsey, what do you see as some of the best practices in front-end loading?
Sure. So the best practices for front-end loading, what we see on that one, first and foremost, it is that clarity of the project objectives. What we would say that it is one of the very starting points that frequently we see that it is not actually as clear as we engineers would like as we begin to define a project. So one of the most important elements I would suggest in defining a project is to have clarity of objectives, trade-offs, and what is that the business needs. Once I understand my business needs, I am able then to define a series of options based upon the best alternative is selected for that project. And once I have the best selection of that alternative is when we have to define it, not only in terms of the engineering, design, detailed elements, but also in terms of the execution planning. But we see time after time with many of our projects is that very frequently we tend to be super good, awesome engineers defining all the details of a package, but we do not necessarily do a good job or the best job in the execution planning. Project execution planning is one of the elements that is lagging in industry in terms of best practices, and I would suggest that that is probably one of the challenges that we have right now, as we have lost some of the competency in industry to develop projects. So if I have to emphasize anything, or as I visit our clients and emphasize what is that they need to do, more frequently than not will be that element of the execution planning, defining well how it needs to be done, who will do it, and when will be done, as well as implementing some optimization practices so that that scope is not only well-defined, well-planned, but also optimized to get best for the business. I'm going to stop now because I can go on in this topic just as Kane said.
Great, thanks, Patricia. And then Michael, maybe from an engineering and construction perspective, why, from your perspective, is front-end loading like so important, and what is the impact if you actually don't get this right?
Thanks. So I agree with my colleagues there, and I just want to touch on a couple of additional points there. Is one, for front-end loading, one of the major objectives from an EPC contractor's perspective is early on we need to make sure that we are designing the right project. So as Patricia talked about, we need to understand what the business drivers are for that project and what those objectives are. Secondly, as we get through the front-end loading phases and sequencing, I think generally the industry does very similar things with respect to our expectations around front-end loading. But where I see projects go awry is as Patricia was talking about, really challenging the execution plan, and then making sure, I think we were talking about here, making sure that we're building the right project, and that the process scheme is firm, it's well understood, it's adopted by the client organization, including operations and maintenance folks, and when we don't do these things properly, or we find out during execution that there was a bit of misalignment in either the business drivers or the process scheme or even the execution approach, it just leads to not meeting the expectations of the project, and misalignment, and potentially even recycling of work, and then that just leads to budget or cost and schedule pressures or extensions.
And Michael, maybe a follow-up question on this is there anything that you see owners do lately compared to maybe even a couple of years ago that basically is improving those project execution plans? Like any latest and greatest things that you see, so like the best-in-class folks do?
Well, what we've seen on some recent projects, and certainly there's a bit of a desire currently in some of the market segments to go a little bit more fixed price, and that means that you know, for both the owner's sake and the contractor's sake, that these areas are well understood. I like to see owners that have teams that are really engaged in understanding the numbers and understanding the execution plan, you know, including the entire supply chain process. And we're seeing projects and owner teams really delving into the details of how Jacobs intends to execute once we get out of front-end loading. And to me, that's a positive. We want there to be a lot of transparency in the way that we're going to execute the project. And you know, the red flags that I see is when process schemes are not completely adopted or accepted by all owner project team members. And you know, I also like to see, from a best practice perspective, a really engaged conversation around the cost estimate, the schedule, and the progress curves being developed at the end of FEL, the FEL phase.
Great, and maybe so we just got a question in from our audience, and maybe Kane, I'll address this question to you, which is, what are some of the key elements of a project execution plan, specifically when it comes to safety during some of those FEL stages? Do you have a perspective on that? Kane?
So I think you directed that to Kane, but I'm
Okay. Nah, I think I'm unmuted now. So related to safety, I think it's critical to understand the project execution plan, knowing when different phases, execution phases, are going to take place, which contractors are going to be in the area, and also major events, things like heavy lifts, those sorts of things. I think by defining those things well up front in a project execution plan, you can have a positive impact on safety, because when everybody understands the project execution plan and knows more about when critical activities are going to happen, and puts a little bit of thought into staging critical activities such that safety is in mind, I think that is a benefit for the project, and then filters down to the actual field activities. The craft will have a better understanding of what's happening and what's going on at particular times, and can do a better job of focusing on safety.
Thank you. And Michael, I think you also wanted to address the safety point here. So over to you.
Yeah, I'll add a couple other things from what Kane was saying. I agree that in a lot of our refining portfolios today, it's full of brownfield projects, it's full of turnaround projects, it's full of engagement on existing facilities. And there's a couple aspects that I'd like to highlight as you write your project execution plans coming out of FEL. As Kane mentioned, not only you want to look at your logistics on job sites where you're going to be doing laydown, how you're going to be moving materials around, particularly for an existing operating facility, how we will, as you mentioned, what the crane placement looks like, but also what we're finding more and more important on these projects is making sure that we establish our project sites as sites of choice for the craft, making sure that we adequately plan for sanitation facilities, water facilities, lunch rooms, and even today, things that are very important to both the staff and the craft with access, telecommunications, internet, whatever. Just making sure that we we provide a good quality job site, well thought out logistics. These are things that occasionally are not the primary focus of coming out of FEL, but we're certainly engaging a lot more on those aspects prior to authorization.
Great, thank you. And Patricia, I think you had some additional thoughts on this as well.
Yes, actually, what I wanted to point out is that some comments that Mike has made a few minutes ago. In industry, we see all types of contractors and contractors' cultures and values and so on. Something that Mike mentioned a few times is how, as a contractor, they have great level of interest of having the owner involved in the execution plan, that they have great level of interest on having the owner involved in all of these elements of how to drive safety, how to drive productivity, and some other similar aspects of the execution. On the other hand, what I observe in industry is that the owners try to delegate a lot of those activities to the contractor and not necessarily to the follow-up that the contractor needs and deserves to deliver the project properly. So I would say that something that I would like to emphasize here is that this of being involved and heavily involved in the project is not necessarily intervening or interfering with the contractor's work, but rather supporting them, helping them, and enabling them to actually deliver the projects that are more effective, more efficient for your businesses. So I think that it's super important just to highlight that the contractors will not necessarily push back on you being involved, but rather they are asking to have more involvement of the owners to deliver better projects.
Thank you. And maybe in addition to that, I think we have a very interesting question from our audience, which is, what has been a common forgotten element in project execution plans from the owners? So maybe Patricia, maybe that's another good question for you, and then Michael, I'd love to hear from you as well on that after Patricia.
Yeah, and I love that question, because one of the elements that I would see that is super forgotten is the issue about productivity and field productivity. Most owners will have some elements of safety in their execution plans. Most owners will include some safety practices that are very common, such as the walkthroughs, owner leadership, that it is present at the site, and so on. In productivity, however, we see that the owners not really have much of a either understanding or interest on improving the productivity. And productivity of the contractors is the one that actually makes a project to be more or less successful to a large degree. And in productivity, what we are talking about here, it is delivering the project with high level of labor productivity to make sure that the costs are maintained and constrained, and not only the cost, but also the schedule is delivered on time. There are many practices in lean construction and lean type of activities that help owners understand better how to improve productivity and how to improve the contractor's performance via observations and practices that would lead to better productivity, but they are not used. They are not being necessarily used now, or if they are, we see it just in a few projects, not as an industry practice. So if there is any opportunity for industry, is to get more into understanding productivity, how can be affected, how can be influenced, and drive for those practices that will drive better productivity.
And maybe over to you, Michael. Any other sort of like common forgotten elements that you see in PEPs?
Yeah, I'll take a different approach here. One of the things that we're really pushing now is in our execution plans, but also in our conversations with our clients around the execution phase, is really having much more comprehensive engagement on information flows, and how Jacobs is very interested in how we can provide data to the owner at the throughout the course of execution, and certainly prior to turnover. How can we provide data in a format and form and content that is easily consumed by the owner without rekeying things in or or digging through PDFs. We're much more interested in defining at the end of the FEL phase what is our information management practices going to look like? How do we make sure that the systems are talking to each other, and how do we leverage the information that is generated by the EPC contractor and provide that to the owner in a way that they can consume it directly without much double handling of that data.
Great. Maybe last question is going to be for you, Kane, before we move on to the second topic, which is I just wanted to latch on to this topic of field productivity that Patricia talked about, and as well as like the information flows that Michael talked about. From an owner's perspective, Kane, anything that you do specifically to basically address field productivity, or any requirements that you have from your EPC contractors on those information flows?
I think the thing that we try to do to address that is best we can. Obviously, we're in an operating plant where things are changing constantly, but best we can give a good definition of what work we expect to be going on in the area that might affect the project itself. So if we have turnarounds or other activities that we know are going to happen during the project execution, define those as well as possible and make plans around those. Also give good definition of our safety requirements, our work permitting requirements, and anything else that might have that we might do to impact the contractor's productivity. The better understanding that both parties can have of those things, the better we can plan for productivity issues.
Great. Thank you for sharing, Michael, and Kane and Patricia. Let's move on to our second topic of the day, which is all around project leadership and sort of the required skills and capabilities. And maybe, Kane, maybe we kick it off with you on this one, which is when you think about staffing your project teams, how do you think about bringing together the best team? Again, and what are some of the specific skills and capabilities that you look for when you put together your project teams?
So the things we're looking for there, we're looking for the very experienced personnel that have shown capabilities and have been around and know the particular operating area well, and may be able to uncover any potential issues that would come up during construction or with the process. So we're generally trying to leverage the senior, most knowledgeable personnel in certain areas, which those people are the ones that are desired for many different activities. So it's really important to work with the plant management staff to leverage those folks and get some or a full-time commitment if possible from those personnel. And I'm talking about process, operations, maintenance, reliability. Try to get at least some of their time and input. And again, going back to the previous point, really you need their input and communication early on so that they can be thinking about those things in the front end definition, not when you get into the detailed design and execution phases. So getting those people involved and engaged early on in the front end loading is critical.
And then, Michael, you obviously work with many owners. What do you see the owners that put the best teams forward do different compared to some of the others?
Unmuted.
One of the things that we see is the owners that recognize the commitment, the time commitment, and their engagement in the workflows that are part of the FEL process, whether it be HAZOPs or plot plan reviews or model reviews or execution plan discussions or estimate reviews. Those clients that understand that they need to bring, as Kane was mentioning, that they need to bring different expertise from within their organization to the FEL phase as appropriate and necessary. Where we see it go wrong is when potentially some clients will underestimate the amount of effort or the amount of commitment that it will take for the FEL phase to be successful. Then we see decisions not being made. We see potentially recycling of decisions and work products, and just generally the time it takes to get through the stage gate process, if you will, just seems to obviously take longer. So, what we like to see with our owners is to make sure that they fully understand. We like to identify their activities on the schedule so that there's little ambiguity about where those commitments lie from a time frame perspective, and then and then work towards making sure that that their obligations are clearly understood, and that there's no no confusion around who's going to do what at what time.
And Patricia, maybe over to you. What have you seen as some of the best practices when it comes to project leadership and, again, getting the right skills and capabilities on owners' teams?
Right. So one of the top requirements that we see that will drive better performance of specific people or roles within the project is that clear accountability of what is that you are responsible for and what the expectations are for your role. And that clear accountability, it is not something that is, or it is only communicated verbally. In many cases, we have some owners who actually develop very detailed and extensive contracts between the project director and the different functions of the project to drive that accountability and be clear of what it is expected for each of the roles. That is one of the best practices that I have seen and that I have observed in very few projects when these contracts between the project director and the different functions or roles exist. Clearly, in order to have these clear accountabilities, what you need is clarity of roles and responsibilities that are well defined and specific for this project. I don't care how many times we have worked together. In this project, this particular project, my roles and responsibilities might be slightly different, and that has to be very well defined. And obviously, all of this, as Michael was saying, the best way to fit it is within the context of the stage-gated process, in which I not only know what my roles and responsibilities are, but I also have a clear sequence of when is that I need to act upon or solve. And all of that consolidated into the project schedule that will allow us then to see and plan when is that resources need to be brought in place, when is that resources need to be onboarding, get this accountability on the table clear so that they can then be able to follow the process, follow the schedule, and deliver the best for the company. And we have too many cases in which we have very young engineers or people without experience, and we are assuming too much in terms of what they know and what they should be delivering for the project. And here is what we are suggesting, you know what, as sharp as they are, let's clearly define what is expected from everybody so that we all can play the game on the best way, which is basically not causing delays, not causing problems, giving the right input at the right time for the project, the contractors, or whoever is needed.
Thank you, Patricia. Maybe over to what I think is a super important question from our audience, which has everything to do with the aging workforce, which we know here in the US is and will only become a bigger issue. So maybe Kane, maybe let's hear from you first. How do you plan, or how are you already addressing the age gap and sort of like the aging workforce?
So I think the critical thing there, as far as a planning tool, is getting the younger folks in the system, if you will, and getting them on board, and then also getting them experience in a less stressful role, so not in a lead role or a high-profile role, but maybe in a kind of a background role, or just getting some exposure to the projects where they can learn and absorb some knowledge from those senior experienced folks while not having to deal with the stress of being the guy on the project. So, you know, it's always a struggle, especially from our end, to make sure we're getting new people in ahead of the retirements and all the knowledge walking out the door. But to the extent we can get those younger people in the door sooner and getting them experience on bigger, more complex projects so they can see more and learn more quicker rather than exposure maybe to smaller or less complex projects early on in their career, which might be more of a normal career path.
And then maybe over to Michael. Michael, maybe do you want to ask your view on the exact same topic?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So, you know, there's no doubt that our home office engineering, you know, personnel age gap is growing, and it's extremely important for companies, both on the owner side and the contractor side, to put some robust knowledge transfer practices in place. Jacobs is investing and has been investing heavily in our knowledge content, and we're working to improve the accessibility of that content. We're also looking at different ways of utilizing our more experienced engineers and designers to leverage that expertise across multiple projects, as opposed to having them potentially fully, you know, completely consumed by one single project, if possible, so that we can improve the face-to-face time between our most senior expert engineers and designers and those coming up today, because as we all know what the curve looks like as far as personnel that are, you know, at or near retirement age, is not going to go away. We can't ignore it any longer. We really need to continue to step up, and I know my peers in the industry are also working very hard towards improving this knowledge transfer, knowledge accessibility, and looking for ways to continue to retain our historical expertise.
And maybe over to you, Patricia, just also from your perspective, having worked with, again, obviously many different owners and sort of like EPCs, what do you see companies do to react to this upcoming aging workforce?
So this is what both I think that Jane and Michael refer is what we call the apprenticeship program. That what we have observed is that there are different, very large variability across companies in terms of the apprenticeship program, and that in some of them is done informally and probably not even done in a way that you can quantify the outcomes or results of that program. You do it just in an informal manner that it is not even a program. It's just a way of doing the business that that cannot be measured or quantified the success. In other cases, we see formal programs of apprenticeship in that, I'm sorry, it's a mouthful for me. But in any case, we see these formal programs in which there are milestones set for the person who we are trying to develop. And specific milestones with time frames in terms of what roles, what level of negotiations, what level of communications with either contractors, external parties, and so on they should have. And in these programs, the difference that we see from company once the program succeeds formally is the level of discipline to follow the program. In that, in some cases, driven by company demands, company requirements and so forth, we forget the program and jump into probably promoting somebody who's not ready to some roles that can be detrimental for a project or for the activity that they are executing. So here is where we are suggesting is that the best practice that we have observed is formal apprenticeship leadership programs that are actually followed, tracked over time, and measure the performance.
So when we then think about project leadership and skills and capabilities, obviously the interaction between owner and contractor, of course, is quite important. And so we have an interesting question here, which is what are the thoughts of the speakers around, for example, having owners and clients actually sit in engineering offices during the FEL phases? Maybe Kane. Maybe I want to ask you if you have experience with that, and like what type of positions maybe, or like what's the frequency at which you would have your folks actually physically work together with the engineering firm or some of the other EPC stages?
So I don't have any direct experience because, frankly, we typically are resource constrained enough that we don't have the luxury of doing those sorts of things. Our model is more to work extremely closely with the contractors and EPC firms, in that we make frequent visits to their office and work very closely with them, but putting them in place for a long period of time is not something that we have experience with. And while I would see value in that, again, we just haven't had the capability to do that.
Michael, have you seen this as a trend, or are you observing some of this where some of your clients come to actually sit with you with the big engineering function that you guys have, or what's your view, Michael?
Yeah, sure. So we see all kinds of different engagement approaches by clients and our customers in the FEL phase. On a large mega project refining job, we may see a full-time staff of, I've been on a project for the Middle East where we had over 100 people from the owner resident with us. And then I've seen also very small full-time presence or engagement and on work that where we have a long history with that owner and we've done a lot of work at that facility and we're very comfortable with with the way that they do business and what they like to see in how we execute. So, there's a case for all of it. I would say that, certainly from Jacob's perspective, we encourage our owners to co-locate with us or participate with us. Certainly as we continue to move to being more virtual, as we continue to have project team members even on Jacob's side, potentially in multiple offices to tap into expertise that exists in other locations. I think as a business we all need to work to figure out ways to be engaged and productive and perhaps not be physically located on a full-time basis. So, it's important to take a fit-for-purpose type of approach to being located with the EPC contractor, but it's also very important that, as we discussed earlier, that the responsibilities on each side are certainly taken care of in some form or fashion.
Great. So maybe with an eye on the time, I would like to propose that we move to our third and last topic of the conversation today, which is all around EPC and contractor selection and management. So maybe let's first talk a little bit about contractor selection and then move to basically how do we actually think about managing contractors through setting up the right incentives. So Patricia, I know you work a lot with clients on EPC contractor selection and management, and so what are some of the best practices that you see with owners in selecting their EPC and contractors?
So for the contracting component, first of all, what we say is that contracting is a second priority over having the right project team with the right level of front-end loading. So number one is that when we work with clients, we ensure that we have the right project team with the right mind in terms of front-end loading and what they need to deliver before we get into what is the best approach for the contracting strategy and selecting the contractors. And in terms of the contractors, the issue is that contracting is a full life cycle. It is not just a step or one stop to select the contractor, but rather it's a life cycle that begins very early on with the selection of the right contracting strategy all the way down to how will I close this contract and potential claims. And with that end of mind is that the contracting selection begins. And the contracting selection begins, the best practices that we see out there in the industry is to have a process that actually involves a series of quantifiable elements, parameters that can be measured for the different contractors in order to understand what are not only the prices in commercial agreements that I'm reaching, but also the risks associated with that contract selection. So from here is that we see in industry that the best performers of the industry will have these very complex, I would say, matrices of factors that include the elements that should be taken into account based on the priority of the project, based on the priority and the strategy of the business for that specific project, and then translated into the parameters how they will measure the best contractor for that given project. And furthermore, looking to not only the parameters that will satisfy the business needs, but also the risks associated with the contractors. Once we have this matrix defined, then we should be able to go out to the market and first begin the pre-qualification phase that should extensively filter the contractors that we really know that they will be able to satisfy the needs of the business. So it is, as I said, it is an extensive process. It is not a stop. It is an extensive process because the contractors will be the ones who become our partners, our best buddies for the next 3, 4, 5 years to deliver the project, and we need to make sure that that selection is strong, taking into account what is needed for my business, not only what is needed for the project.
Thank you, Patricia. And then Kane, maybe over to you. So when you as an owner think about selecting an EPC contractor, like what are some of the main considerations that are important for you and your team?
So to echo some of Patricia's comments, yeah, it is a long-term partnership that you're looking for, and some of the critical elements that we are looking for is not necessarily just the company, but the team that they have to offer for us. So in recent years, we've seen that the concern has been just because of workload for nearly everybody in the industry, sometimes you're not able to get the team that you would desire for a particular project. So the actual team that is being presented is critically important to success, and maybe past performance of the company itself is not the greatest indicator of success, and you have to look at what the skills of the team that they have to offer may be. Another critical piece that we see is just cultural fit, is the fit of the company, something that will fit with your company and the project in particular. So many times we're looking at projects that are not definitely not what would be considered mega projects, not the $500 million nut projects, but maybe more $50 or $100 million projects. Is the company a good fit for those sizes of projects? Can they perform? Do they perform those type of projects, or can they scale up or scale down to perform those type of projects well? So I would say team and culture would be two of the biggest factors, and also it's dependent on the project for those factors as well. Size of the project, the complexity, revamp versus grassroots. So there's a lot of different factors that go into the selection, and there's never one best fit or one company that fits all, in my opinion.
Great. And then maybe Michael, look, of course, I think it's great obviously that we have you on the panel as well to obviously get your perspective from the EPC side. So maybe the question for you is, what do you think owners typically do not spend enough time on when they select their EPCs?
Unmuted.
Well, that's a really good question. I think that, being with Jacobs and seeing the wide variety of engagements that we have with our clients in a multitude of different commercial models, one of the things that I think coming to the marketplace to try to select an EPC contractor, you have to match your objective as far as what type of engagement you're looking for. Is it going to be very transactional? Is the project pretty cut and dry? Or is it a little bit more engaging if there's some special unique considerations? You're working in an operating facility, it's a brownfield project, there's potential for quite a bit of interaction with the existing operations that may drive some uncertainty, and you want to make sure that I fully agree with what Kane and Patricia said, that the project teams that we propose from our side are very important. We want to make sure that we provide the right skill set, but we also want to make sure that we have a win-win type of commercial arrangement, and that we address any critical factors for that particular project. Greenfield projects, a little bit easier to predict, and shift some responsibility for execution. Perhaps in the market that we have today, where we're doing a lot of brownfield, debottlenecking type work, or operational improvement type work, turnarounds, and those type, I think owners need to really take a good look at, as Kane mentioned earlier, what the engagement's going to be between the owner and the contractor in the field. How do we need to plan for that in the FEL stages, and how do we provide a commercial framework to accomplish those goals without having some kind of contractual breakdown.
Patricia, we actually have a follow-up question for you from the audience, which is basically, could you say a bit more about the relationship between the contracting strategy and the parameters and risks that are considered?
Right. In terms of the parameters and risks that are considered, what the best practice that we see in the industry is that as the contracting strategy is being developed, is that the consideration for what will be important for the selection of the contractor becomes a very early topic of discussion for the team who is responsible for developing the contracting strategy. And those parameters are based on the once more the project objectives. And this is what I am talking about specifically, is that projects might be different in nature based on the requirements of the owner. In some cases, you may need a fast-track project. You may need a project with extensive new technology, or you may need a project that has never been done before at your site or at your location. So based on this one and what your strategy is and what you want to do, there are certain parameters and risk elements that need to be considered. And for instance, parameters that we will see long list of metrics built for the selection of the contractors will be those that would consider the experience, expertise, financial performance, the previous performance of contractors in previous projects, the how the contractor is known for actually using claims out there for other projects, and just in general, the relationship, that's another one that I almost forgot, the relationship that the contractor may want or not to have. For instance, you and I know that there are contractors out there in the industry who want to maintain an arm length approach to the relationship, meaning I really don't want you to be involved in my project owner. I want you to stay away. But there are some other contractors like Jacobs that we know that they want more interaction. So that is something, one of the parameters that we have explicitly seen included in the contractor selection criteria, is that the owners will consider the culture of the contractor and maintaining relationships and so for that selection. As I said, based on the owners' knowledge and based on what the owners want to address, these parameters may be a list of sometimes about 4 or 5 different elements, and sometimes a long list of about 25 different or even more elements that are weighted and then are rated based on how we see these contractors performing, either based on previous experience, other projects, or what we know of that contractor. And then the risk element comes into place in that for each of those parameters that we have identified to be critical, then we look into what is the risk that this contractor will not be meeting that specific requirement. And they go in a line-by-line item, identifying the risk once more, quantifying those risks, and quantifying the contractor, putting it in literally in a spreadsheet to then measure and quantify which one is the best contractor out there based on these parameters. Then it follows the actual discussion within the project team on whether we have the right assessment for that contractor and how to take those results and how to move it forward. But I would say that, as I said, it's a long process to actually get to define the criteria and then measure it, quantify it, and get the right measurement and quantification of how the contractors, the short list of contractors that we may be using, may perform, and then compare them to make the best selection for that contractor.
Awesome. And then when we talk about risks, let's maybe take one final last question from our audience here. Kane, I'll address the question to you, which is any pros and cons of switching engineering contractors between the front-end engineering and the more detailed engineering? Like, when would you consider actually changing out your engineering contractor?
Well, I think there's both pros and cons, and it's again somewhat project specific. But I think generally there's probably more cons than pros. I think when you're not dealing with specialty technologies or unknowns or some real process challenges, then it becomes a lot easier to switch engineering contractors. Sometimes we see that while a certain company may have strength in EPC performance, maybe they aren't as strong in front-end definition. So if you get a really strong performer in the front-end definition and you don't have some of the critical components you're worried about with technology or process, then you may not be as concerned about switching engineering contractors. But I would say in most cases, there is benefits to having a single contractor. But again, there's other cons to that as well. So it's highly dependent on the project and some of the challenges you're dealing with around the project.
Thank you, Kane. With that, I think that's sort of like I think we're close to the hour here. When I think about the 3 topics that we covered today, everybody, I think on the front end loading and scope definition, we talked about the importance of understanding business needs up front, and we discussed quite a bit the importance of setting up the right project execution plan, right, and the importance that drives for basically the entire project going forward. When we talked about skills and capabilities, we basically obviously addressed the fact that it's important to have people consistently involved across each of the FEL phases. We talked about the importance of setting up the right accountability, and we addressed the age gap and some of the ways to address that, for example, by setting up these information sharing practices. And then on EPC contractor selection, obviously we talked about that this is not a one-step process, and this is definitely an ongoing process. And of course, the importance of setting up the right interfaces between the EPC and the owner, and basically the engagement model that we need to have to execute on that is obviously super important. With that, Theo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Eric Hans, expertly moderated this morning. To you, the audience, thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and got a lot of value from it. Thank you again to our brilliant speakers, Kane, Michael, Eric Hans, and Patricia. I look forward to meeting you in Houston, November 14th and 15th at the Houston Omni Hotel. If you enjoyed the topic of discussion today and you'd like to know more, do check out our conference, Refining, Engineering, and Construction. We hope to meet you all there. All right, with that, I'll sound off. Thanks again, and hope to meet you all soon. Bye.
Unmuted.